talk today about, well, I guess in the end what I really want to talk about is, I think what one can call intolerant tolerance. Intolerant tolerance. I want to speak about tolerance as it's sort of discussed today in the United States, what that means for Muslims, but also I think what it means for other religious groups in this country as well. And in my experience, on the topic that I'm going to speak about, many religious groups in the United States have the same feelings as I would hope Muslims do. And I started thinking about it when I was watching Egyptian television, and anyone who's been paying attention to the events in Egypt the last year and a half, there's just always outrageous stuff happening on Egyptian television. And this is a show in which a presenter was talking to, I don't know, a panel of people, and one of them was a Coptic priest, so a Coptic Egyptian Christian priest. And the priest started complaining about how certain sheikhs in Egypt, especially Salafi sheikhs, were teaching their students, not to love Christians, their fellow Egyptian citizens who were Christians, and that they were teaching their students that Christians are kuffar. So kuffar in Arabic means, in the Quran means unbelievers, people who reject Islam. Now, interestingly, the sheikh who was in question called into the show and basically confronted the priest, and he said, first of all, yes, I think Christians are unbelievers because anybody who reads the Quran will see the Quran says over and over again that people who reject the prophecy of Muhammad and people who say, in addition to that God is one of three or God has a son, these are all unacceptable positions for Muslims, and this makes you a kafir. This makes you someone who denies the prophecy of Muhammad and the message of Islam. And the sheikh continued, yes, I believe that Muslims should not love Christians because the Quran says, don't take people, the unbelievers, or people of the book, as awliya, as friends or partners, as opposed to the Muslims, as opposed to the believers. And the sheikh continued, I don't see why you're so concerned about this, because this doesn't mean that I'm going to hurt you, or that I'm not going to protect your property, or that I'm not going to protect your life, or that I'm not going to buy things from you, or sell things to you, or rent my home to you, or be polite to you when I see you in the street, or shake your hand, or help you when you're injured. These things have nothing to do with my view about your status in the afterlife, or the correctness of the religion you follow. So why are you so concerned, the sheikh added. And it was very interesting for me to watch as other people called into the channel and were saying, I can't believe that this awful sheikh is telling people that Christians are kuffar and saying that you should love your fellow Egyptians who happen to be Christian. This is unacceptable. And people were sort of pulling out their hair and very concerned about what future these Islamist sheikhs or these sort of more conservative Muslims in Egypt, what future were they going to bring to Egypt? So everybody was just agonizing about this. Now, it made me think a lot about how people speak about religion and morality in this country, in the United States. And I just thought about all the times that I had been in a debate with somebody about something about religion or morality or about lifestyle or sexuality. And I say, I don't agree with you about a certain thing, or I think a certain kind of activity is a sin, or I think a certain belief is wrong. But we're in the United States. I acknowledge your legal right to do this. I acknowledge your right to have your own religious beliefs. As a Muslim, I acknowledge that, because Muslims say that the Quran says, to me, my religion, to you, your religion. But I found that in these debates, that's not good enough. That oftentimes people want you to, not just to accept that they have a right to believe something or to do something, but that you actually approve of what they believe or approve of what they do. So you have to believe that their religion is true too, and you have to believe that what they're doing, however much you disagree with it, is actually morally correct. And this has always been very frustrating for me. And I think it's maybe something that many of us have encountered. By the way, not just Muslims. This is something also that is a big problem for anybody who follows a religious tradition that's transcendent, that has certain rules that can't change, that makes claims about the nature of reality, it makes claims about what you should or shouldn't believe. Anybody who has such a belief is going to sometimes find other people who don't agree with them, and they're going to not think that that other person is correct. And if they are not allowed to do that, well, this is a crisis for people of religion. I remember just one example of this. There was a Seinfeld episode once where Elaine had, I don't know if people still know what Seinfeld is. I have to figure out when this is going to be cut off in terms of references. But Elaine has this boyfriend. Now, of course, Elaine's a cynical, atheist person, etc. And she has this boyfriend who turns out is a very committed Christian, and he thinks she's going to hell. And she's terribly upset that he thinks she's going to hell. And he says, listen, I don't understand why you're so upset. You don't believe in my religion anyway. Why do you care? But Elaine just couldn't accept that her boyfriend thought she was going to hell. I think this is something that is quite common in interaction between people of faith and people who don't believe in religion in this country. But I was really curious about where does this sort of intolerant tolerance come from? Where does this idea of, people on this Egyptian television show were talking about how important it was to love your fellow man, love your fellow Egyptian, your fellow American. Where does this come from? Where does this language of love come from? So I started trying to look into this. Now, I'll ask you to bear with me. I was told this is a very intellectual audience, so I'm engaging a little bit of intellectual history. And if you start, your eyes start rolling back in your head, then the people who told me that you're really intelligent may be wrong. So don't disappoint me in those who are there. Language, a Christian language, the dominant language of Christianity, which makes it kind of ironic, because the idea of the language of love is a Christian language. This comes from the Gospel of Matthew, which is one instance, in which Jesus is asked by a young rabbi. He's asked as a rabbi. Remember, Jesus was a young rabbi himself. Asked, what is the most important law, the most important of the Jewish Mosaic laws? Jesus replies, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second one is like unto it. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. This idea that all of the Jewish legal tradition was sort of absorbed into these two commandments, love God and love your neighbor, became a central plank in Christianity as preached by the Apostle Paul. For him, love is really the idiom of Christianity. To love your neighbor and love God is really the only law that's applicable to Christians. And even centuries later, in the 1600s and 1700s, when Christians started, or Western Europeans started kind of breaking out of the control of the church, started looking critically at the Bible, not as revealed scripture, but as a book that had to be criticized and historicized and maybe not seen as divine. When they started breaking out of the strictures of religious tradition, this language of love continued. This is very interesting. So, a person who in many ways is the father of modern biblical criticism, some might even say the father of modernity, is a Jewish philosopher from Amsterdam who died in 1677. His name is Benedict or Baruch Spinoza. People have often heard of Spinoza. So if you ever want to read an incredible book, read his theological political treatise. And you will just, as if you see kind of the beginning of modernity right in this book. He rejects the idea that the Bible is a revealed book designed to apply to people throughout history, for Christians in all times and in all places. For him, it's a book that was only revealed to or only meant for the people of Israel at the time of the Jewish prophets. What he says is that the truth of religion can be known through reason. But what is the truth of religion? It's love God, love your neighbor, act charitably. So in the end, it's still expressed through this Christian idiom of love. If you look at those individuals who are most representative of the project of modernity, people oftentimes, we live in this modern world, or postmodern world, or post-postmodern world, whatever we live in, people look at their surroundings today and they think this is just the way the world is, or has always been. That's not true. We live in a world that is constructed, a project that was constructed by philosophers, social engineers, thinkers, and politicians throughout the 1800s and 1900s. And one of these people's name is Auguste Comte, the French person named Auguste Comte. And he has this, has this plan for a positive, modern Western world. He's, by the way, the first person that I know of who ever used the word the West. We talk about the West all the time. The West this, the West that, right? He's the person who started it. It's very interesting. Mid-1800s, as far as I know. And he talks about this Western Republic in which, capitalists and scientists will organize the society, and everybody will live together by subjugating all their desires and ambitions to the universal love. Universal love. So again, this idea of that love is sort of essential for social cohesion. But I think the real origin of this modern intolerant tolerance is with a French romantic philosopher in the 18th century named Jean-Jacques Rousseau. I'm sure you've heard of Rousseau in his book, The Social Contract. He had a big impact on later European history, later American thinkers. He has this idea of kind of an ideal republic where everybody, each individual is committed to realizing their own worth as a person, their own worth as a human being. And everybody's committed to others realizing their own worth and value as a human being. By the way, he calls this love of self. So again, we have this idea of love. One of the things he sort of thinks of as a way to promote this society is what he calls civil religion. Civil religion. And this is really a kind of type of religion. Sort of certain characteristics that religion has to have. One of the few rules for this religion, or what he thinks is an acceptable religion, is that it prohibits intolerance. He prohibits intolerance. What does he say? And I quote, "Tolerance should be given to all religions that tolerate others, so long as their dogmas contain nothing contrary to the duties of citizenship." What does that mean to tolerate others? In a way, that my whole talk tonight is about what does tolerance mean. Does tolerance mean I recognize your right to have a belief that's different from mine? That's not enough for Rousseau. For Rousseau, tolerance means, and I quote, that it is impossible to live at peace with those we regard as damned. It is impossible to live at peace with those we regard as damned. You cannot live for him in a society, or at least in the society that he wants, you cannot live in peace if you believe that someone else in that society is going to hell, or if they believe you're going to hell. This is very interesting. But where does this come from? Why does he say this? I think one of the reasons is, he lived in the mid-1700s, mid to late 1700s, and he looked back at the tremendous religious violence that had destroyed Europe from around 1517 to around 1650. 150 years of religious warfare. Countless numbers of people killed, resources destroyed. He sees religious intolerance as a slippery slope to violence. But the second major ingredient, I think, or explanation for why Rousseau believes this, why he forbids people from believing that other people are going to hell, is his tremendous religious skepticism. I just talked to you about Spinoza, about the kind of people breaking free from religious tradition, and this was a big factor in intellectual life in Europe in the 1600s and 1700s, as it is today. That people didn't believe any longer, or at least intellectuals didn't believe any longer, that the religious traditions that they knew of Christianity and Judaism, that these were really the way to know the truth. For them, truth, salvation, happiness, understanding existed outside these old religious traditions. They no longer had confidence in them. Enlightenment in the future. Again, this is rooted in the idea that the existing truths that people say we should follow, Islam, Christianity, whatever, these aren't good enough. They're not really true. There's some other truth out there that we're going to move towards. We're going to move towards it because we're free to speak, we're free to disagree, and eventually the free market will lead us towards this truth. So, when we think about this kind of modern intolerant tolerance, what I was describing on this Egyptian television show, what I was describing about the debates that we often get in, or that I often get in, where does it come from? Well, these kind of ethereal evocations of loving one another and loving your fellow man, these are the vestiges of a desacralized Christian morality. It's sort of groped for as one of the few resonating social chords in our society. These are the kind of leftovers of Christian values once the religion was ripped out and the transcendental tradition of Christianity and belief in the revealed text is sort of pushed aside. You have just these sort of echoes of love and it's almost empty. Reminds me of when I go to weddings and I hear non-Muslim weddings, you hear people take a quote of the Bible, for example, from Paul, some of Paul's letters, and he's talking about love. And they take this and they read at the wedding, and it's supposed to talk about how these two people love each other. But that's not what love Paul's talking about, right? For him, he's love of God, love of Jesus. This is like a completely different kind of love. Love between this world and the transcendental world, the world of the divine. And it's sort of made into this very, almost, I don't mean to be dismissive of romantic love, but sort of cheapened love of this world. And it's kind of when we talk about loving your fellow man, it's a sort of vestigial Christian morality. The demand that religious people immediately cease and desist from judging others as either unfaithful or unbelievers, or disapproving of certain lifestyles. These demands are rooted in a political ideology that considers the mutual recognition of all citizens' self-fulfillment to be paramount. So when I talk about Rousseau's political philosophy, this is this idea that you can't believe that someone else's belief is wrong. You have to respect their belief. It has to be true. You have to approve of their lifestyle. Because they're fulfilling themselves, and you have to acknowledge their fulfillment. You have to assist in their fulfillment. I think this comes from this phenomenon we see in the United States and other Western countries today, and in Egypt, is, I think, rooted in political philosophy like Rousseau's. Finally, the hostility, and I know people in the United States often talk about war on Christianity, and I wonder what the heck are they talking about? It doesn't seem like there's a war on Christianity at all. But this idea that there's a war on religion in the United States, you can see where this is coming from. Because I as a religious person, often I'm always getting bashed over the head for daring to believe that someone else's belief is wrong, or that somebody else's lifestyle is wrong. They say you're being judgmental, you're being intolerant. Insert whatever word you want to insert about what I'm being, and that's what I am. Right? This hostility, I think, comes from, again, I said before, the free market of ideas. It's like, haven't you gotten with the program? Your religion is obsolete. Your religious belief, you're clinging to some scripture from the ancient Middle East. That's silly. This is obsolete. We moved on beyond that. Get with the program. You're sort of treated with the hostility of a person who's begging on the street who hasn't gotten a job. Get with the program, buddy. Get a job. Don't drag the rest of us down. There's almost this notion that ideas have moved ahead, and if you're not going to move ahead with us, then how are we all going to move into this progressive future where eventually we'll all find the truth? This reality poses two problems for us, and by us I mean not just Muslims. I mean people who follow transcendent religious traditions in general. One, it rejects categorically the very transcendental morality and claims about salvation made by most religions. You can't claim that, for example, homosexuality is immoral or wrong, because you're denying someone else their fulfillment. And in the free market of ideas, at least in urban America, that opinion is no longer accepted. That opinion has been cast out. The free market has moved ideas and moved on, so you better get with the program. It denies our claims about salvation. If you believe that you have to believe a certain thing in order to be saved, in order to please God, in order to attain happiness in the afterlife, that goes against the idea that everybody's belief is legitimate. The second problem is that this modern idiom of intolerant tolerance is rooted in the very Christian tradition that it claims to have moved beyond. So when someone tells me you have to love your fellow man, why? Where does this idea of love come from? What does that mean? I don't even understand. Why do I have to love somebody? Well, I don't know. You just have to love somebody. You have to love each other. Like the Birds song and all these songs from the 60s and things like that. The Beatles song. What is this? This isn't morality. This is a few rock songs and things like that in a movie you saw. Where does this come from? Again, it's this like vestigial leftovers of what originally was a very powerful language of morality and belief in Christianity. Okay, so now I've been very critical of what I think is this modern intolerant tolerance. What's the alternative? What's the alternative? I think actually the Islamic alternative and the American alternative are very similar. Because real liberalism, not this intolerant liberalism, the liberalism that says you have to believe what everyone else believes is correct, says that people can live together in a society despite the fact they have completely different faiths. Because they live together based on a contract, a social contract, which is that, I won't hurt somebody else, I'm going to respect their property, they're going to respect my property, we're going to get together, we're going to have established systems of making decisions, of leadership, and in this way we can all retain our original beliefs and actually still live in an organized polity where people's property and their rights are respected. It's very simple. Very simple, it's very American. It's also very Islamic. This is what I find, the Islamic tradition is absolutely fascinating. It's incredibly practical, but also totally committed to people's freedom of conscience. Totally committed to people's freedom of conscience. In Islamic law, there's a very clear distinction between, when we talk about iman, or faith, there's an iman al-shar'i, and there's an iman al-fitri. In one sense, your iman is your religious identity. I'm Muslim, I'm Christian, I'm Jewish, I'm Zoroastrian. Okay, these are categories you fit into. When we talk about Islamic law, or the state, or the laws of the society, these are categories that have legal consequences. So if you're Muslim, you can marry a Muslim man can marry a Muslim woman. He can, when he dies, his Muslim children will inherit his wealth. He can inherit from his Muslim parents. And when he dies, he's buried in a Muslim graveyard. He can go to Hajj, he can enter Mecca, right? These are things that Muslims can do, non-Muslims can't do. By the way, at no point have we actually talked about what I actually believe, what this Muslim actually believes. For all we know, that Muslim is an atheist. For all we know, that Muslim is going to roast in hell for all eternity because he's a terrible person and doesn't believe in God at all. That second type of iman is what we call the iman al-fitri. This is actually what you believe in your heart. And this only God knows. So somebody could be, legally speaking, a Christian, legally speaking, a Jew, legally speaking, a Muslim. For all we know, the Christian's going to go to heaven, the Jew's going to go to heaven, and the Muslim's going to go to hell. Because only God knows what someone's faith actually is. But that doesn't mean that we erase the categories that actually give our communities body. I mean, imagine you have a Muslim community here. Muslim community means there's something about Muslims that's different than Christians, that's different from Jews. And if he's trying to erase all these boundaries because you say we don't know what true faith is, you've destroyed the very fabric of society. So in the Islamic tradition, there's a big difference between saying someone's a Catholic, which is a legal ruling. It means you're not Muslim. You've rejected Islam as a category. I have no idea what's going to happen to you in the afterlife. I don't know what's going to happen to me in the afterlife. But the fact that you're a Catholic and I'm a Muslim means that there's certain things we can't do. I can't marry you. You can't inherit from me. That doesn't mean that I can't buy something from you, that I can't sell something to you, that I don't care for you, And we have in the life of the prophet tremendous examples of this. The prophet is very interesting. Throughout his entire life in Medina, first of all, in Medina, he was responsible for adjudicating disputes between any two people, between Jews and Muslims, between polytheists and Muslims, between polytheists and Jews. But what does the Quran say? If they come to have you rule between them, فَحْكُمْ بَيْنَهُمْ بِالْعَدْلِ. Right? Rule between them by truth, by justice. The prophet would, and sometimes he would actually, there's an interesting case when there's a Muslim named Ibn al-Ashar, and he said that there's a Jew who claimed that, a Jewish Arab who claimed that he owned some of this Muslim's land. And they went before the prophet, and the prophet asked the Muslim, do you have any evidence? He says, no, I own this land. And he asked the Jewish person to swear an oath that you own this land. The Jewish person swears, and the prophet says, okay, the land is yours. You're prepared to swear an oath. He has no evidence. Islamically speaking, I'm ruling in your favor. The Muslim gets very upset. What? You're ruling on behalf of a Jew? This is how justice works. And there's so many instances in the life of the prophet. I mean, at one point he actually buys food from a Jewish neighbor, and he says he's going to pay them back in a few months. And he leaves his armor with the Jewish family as guaranteed as a security deposit. And he's the prophet. First of all, he's a leader of the community. He could just, I assume, take it. Second of all, he's a prophet of God who could probably make some kind of argument that I need to take this. But he's engaged in very mundane transactions with Jews and polytheists in this community. When they went to fight the Battle of Hunayn after the Muslims took Mecca, he actually borrowed numerous suits of armor from an Arab who is still a pagan, who hadn't become Muslim yet. And the man said, are you taking these? You're just taking them from me? He said, no. We're taking them, and we guarantee we'll bring them back, and if they're damaged, we'll repay you for them. What are the other types of relationships that Muslims can have? What are the sort of notions of rights and obligations that Muslims have in society? When the sheikh on the Egyptian television was saying, just because I think you're a kafir doesn't mean that I'm not going to be polite to you and that I'm not going to visit you while you're sick. Where does this come from? This is a big part of the Prophet's life. In one hadith, the Prophet says, Jiran thalatha. There's three types of neighbors. And I'll just give you the English. There's a neighbor who is a mushrik, is a polytheist. But they have the haqq al-jawar. They have the right of a neighbor. You have to, what is the right of a neighbor, the Prophet says? If they're sick, you visit them. If they die, you go to their funeral and give your condolences. If they're in need of some clothing, you provide it. If something good happens to them, you congratulate them. If something bad happens to them, you comfort them. If you can't cook food that smells really good and the smell of the food is going into their house, you can't do that unless you offer them some of the food. These are all the type of things that a neighbor has to offer his neighbor. What does neighbor mean? Well, Ali ibn Abi Talib says that anybody who hears the same adhan, is in the range of hearing the same adhan from that mosque, that person is your neighbor. Other people say anybody 40 houses away, up to 40 houses away in every direction, that's a neighbor. And as we saw from the life of the Prophet, even if you are not someone's neighbor, you still have agreements of contract, you have to respect their property, you have to respect their bodily integrity, you can't hurt them, right? You can't punch them, you can't go and take something from them. These are all rules that everybody in a society has to follow as Muslims. So, what the Egyptian sheikh he called in to defend himself on his television show was saying is that what you think about another person's ultimate fate in the afterlife, what you think about whether or not their belief is correct or not, what you think about whether every single thing they do during the day is right or wrong, this has absolutely nothing to do with the daily interactions we all have in society. Personal interactions. commercial interactions. These are all governed by, for Muslims, very specific rules. Rules that apply to Muslims and non-Muslims. All those neighbors I talked about, it doesn't matter if they're Muslims or non-Muslims or Christians or polytheists or Buddhists or whatever, they still have those rights. And if you think about it in the United States, I'd say that's how things work here. Despite the fact that people tend to talk about loving one another and things like that, when's the last time you went to the store and you didn't steal something from the store because you love the cashier? Or you didn't, run a red light because you love all the other drivers in the intersection. I mean, this is nonsense. Actually, at least from my perspective, love has nothing to do with my interaction with people every day. It has to do with the fact that in our society there's generally agreed upon code of obligations and rights, proper manners, and this is how people coexist. This is how Muslims, I think Islam teaches people should coexist, and this is how I think, functionally, in the United States, healthy liberalism works. I think one of the enemies, one of the opponents of this, is an intolerant tolerance, an intolerant liberalism that requires us to erase our beliefs in affirming those of others. It requires us to deny our own moralities because we have to affirm those of others. I know that iftar is coming, so eyes are going to glaze over. And I don't know if you want to have any questions or answers or anything, or later on. Okay. So otherwise, I think now you'll have something more entertaining, which is fundraising and another raffle. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. It was a very interesting lecture on tolerance. What we're going to do is have another raffle. If I could have Marie.